TikTok is on the clock. The Chinese-owned social media app is facing a ban here in the United States unless it is sold by its Chinese parent company, ByteDance. Almost immediately after President Joe Biden signed the law in April, challengers took to the courts to argue that it's unconstitutional. TikTok sued the federal government, claiming the law violates the First Amendment. And a group of TikTok creators also filed suit, saying the law, quote, promises to shutter a discrete medium of communication that has been part of American life.
I think storytelling is one of the most distinctive features about TikTok. And I think another thing that people love about TikTok and why they gravitate towards TikTok is that they have really perfected the algorithm and the ability to curate your own algorithm and see the type of content that you want to see.
TikTok says nearly 150 million Americans are on the app. So does it violate the First Amendment? Is it really a national security threat that should be banned? And can the government intervene with small business owners who rely on the app to make a living? We've got answers to all of the above with two special guests tonight. First, Steve McKeon, who has made it his personal mission to educate others about protecting personal data, something that politicians on both sides of the aisle say is under threat so long as TikTok has a Chinese parent company. McKeon is the CEO of MacGyver Tech and MacNerd. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So first question, is TikTok actually a national security threat, or is that just a political calculus?
I believe it is. As a security expert like myself, about 4 months ago, we were pulled into a ransomware attack for an American company. While we were doing our investigation, we found a bunch of data going to China, and we initially thought it was the hackers from the ransomware. But when we looked closer, it was all the TikTok data from the apps that the employees were using during their work hours, and it was going right to mainland China, which to me, it really jumps out. Why is that data going right to there? Usually in my world, it would go to a CDN or a place closer to you in a data center, but it's going right across halfway across the world. What they're doing with the data, it's hard to tell. It was out of our scope of the investigation. So I do believe there are some issues there, from a security standpoint. Also reached out to other security professionals in my industry just to kind of get a little bit of a backdrop on that, because our scope wasn't TikTok investigation. But when we looked into it and find out other researchers are seeing some pretty alarming things, it really jumps out at me. This app is different than other apps, and maybe there is a reason that why we're kind of having these red flags raised, and the government's trying to put the brakes on at least being owned by a Chinese company.
The TikTok CEO here in the U.S. has repeatedly said they do not share their data with their Chinese parent company or any entity in China. But the lawsuit also seems to indicate that the Chinese parent company would have to sign off on any kind of sale. They also make the argument, of course, that this law would violate their First Amendment rights. What do you make of going after TikTok and the national security threat through this lawsuit? And as you point out, maybe they are a little different because of their parent company, but also a little different because we're talking about media here and we're talking about free speech.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the free speech thing, I think, is a difficult argument, at least from the TikTok side. I mean, maybe 100 years ago when we had two printing presses and one of them was kind of controlling the narrative, there's many options that are out there besides TikTok that do that. If TikTok went away, there's plenty other apps that can kind of do a similar thing. But I believe TikTok will probably most likely be sold to an American company if we're lucky, and then the scrutiny and the regulations that are applied to American companies could be applied better to TikTok, and making sure whatever they're doing with data is done in the right way. Right now, it's difficult to say, but like what I was mentioning earlier, when I talked to some of my other colleagues in the security world, they identified a thing called app collusion, where TikTok will ask other apps for privileges that it doesn't have to get access maybe to your text messages and emails and other things. And that's called app collusion, which is really not a good thing either. I haven't dug too much deep into it, but the papers that I read from my fellow colleagues are a little bit of concerning that this app is maybe doing more things than it should. And who knows what's going to happen in the legal cases. But from a security standpoint, I do believe this app is something that should be looked at much closer.
And you're the expert here. So what can folks do in the meantime before, as you predict, it will be sold to an American company to make sure that their data is protected?
That's a really difficult thing, because we as the end user have no control over where that data is going from the app. The only thing that you could do, in my world, it's a little nerdy, but you can do a thing called geofencing. Geofencing, basically, you put a fence around your websites or your access to the internet and say only like America or basically Canada or any country you want to let in is allowed to go in and out. But that's very technical. Most end users will never know how to do those types of things. But the only way to stop data going to China from the app is actually blocking it from the firewalls or your internet provider, which is out of the hands of most people, I think.
For some folks who originally downloaded TikTok, then learned about this national security threat very quickly at the end here, deleting it off the phone, is that helpful, or is there always kind of a back end point there?
Right. I personally have deleted the app off my phone, seeing that some of the things I found other than what it was doing is sending the data out there. I just didn't feel comfortable having an app like that on my phone until we had more scrutiny and control over that. Maybe using the web-based version might be a little bit better than it is the app on your phone.
Certainly an option for folks who are looking to protect themselves. Steve McCann, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.